Chair, and thank you, our witnesses, for being here today. Ms. Dovgal, you've written, I read your article here on our national culture, and under this current Liberal government, we've seen record-breaking levels of immigration and not a lot of planning going into things like housing infrastructure or integration, for that matter. So in your view, has this mass immigration approach without a cohesive framework contributed to the social and economic breakdowns that we're seeing in our country?
It's absolutely clear that we have seen this robbing Peter to pay Paul phenomenon taking place, where some of the advantages economically and in terms of demographic sustainability we've been getting from immigration, at least on paper, and then in reality, we've been seeing a lot of the pressures. I also do a lot of housing advocacy, and in cities like Vancouver, rental rates are incredibly unaffordable. We see direct ties with inbound immigration numbers and the price increases you see year over year.
Ms. Dovgal, I'm just going to stop your time for a second. Just please speak clearly, and as you don't have to go so slow, but just a little bit slower. Oh, just get closer to the microphone. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks so much. Yeah, no, it definitely, I think there's a phenomenon that you're describing, and it's contributing to cultural breakdown. I think a lot of young Canadians of my generation are profoundly stressed, profoundly anxious about their futures, and it's because we have chosen to fix one problem, which is our collapsing demographics, without doing the deep, necessary, and difficult work of ensuring that the infrastructure is there to support all the people coming into the country.
So do you think that people in your generation are lacking, do you see people lacking jobs, and maybe we haven't put the effort into getting those people working in some jobs, and sometimes we bring in immigrants in cases where we shouldn't?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things going on. One of those is a competition that comes from immigration. I think it's fair to say that there are definitely examples where we don't have Canadian workers who can do certain jobs, or Canadian workers don't want to do certain jobs, whether they be highly skilled or service jobs, and that immigration is a solution for some of those things, but I think we've been working a little bit too intensely to increase those numbers uncritically, and the result is a lot of those pressures are being felt by Canadians, and that's why we've seen such, abysmally low support for immigration coming out in the last couple of years by the public.
So Conservatives have called for immigration levels to be tied to things like our ability to house people, the jobs that are available, healthcare, those kinds of things, rather than some random numbers pulled out of the air or driven by someone else. Would you support this kind of pragmatic immigration policy that prioritizes integration over ideology?
Yes, I would support the idea of pragmatic immigration policies, absolutely. But I think my argument as well has been that we need to not just do it purely with a focus to the economy, because if we do that, we're giving up to the system dynamics, and those system dynamics aren't creating the types of outcomes that we want in terms of the composition and the high trust that I think Canadians expect from our society. And, it's one of the reasons immigrants like my parents come to this country and came here for decades, because they want to be safe, they want to have a place where they can respect each other and live in a pluralistic society. And I think we failed not only on some of the economic components of immigration recently, but also on the cultural components.
So tell me a little bit more about the cultural side then. So, what sorts of things would you like to see different to help us to maintain and to improve the cultural side that you're speaking about?
Yeah. I think the piece that you were referring to earlier, it speaks to the broader kind of approach that we take to Canada's identity. So beyond the scope of this committee for sure, but we need to define what it is to be Canadian, and we are in a sense post-national. Many of the people who live in this country come from different places, speak different languages, have different ethnic backgrounds. That is the strength of Canada, but we can't do it in a vacuum where the focus is on looking with shame and some degree of disgust on how we got here, how this country was founded, if we want to present any kind of unified front on who we are. And a lot of the immigrants that I speak to who are coming here now, they don't see anything to being Canadian beyond just civic values, and to them that's not a particularly strong or compelling case. And I think that's an easy one. No, it's a difficult one, but it's a necessary one broadly. And then as it relates to immigration specifically, I really like the general frame of going after people who are outright disrespecting the compact that comes with immigration. They're not obeying the law. They're launching, fake fake claims to try to get into the system. And I think those are basic principles-based things that we can do to ensure that the immigration system itself has integrity and reflects the values that Canadians expect it to have.
So to kind of paraphrase what you just said, you're saying that we should be strict with our rules. If you break the rules, if you break our laws, if you don't follow the cultural norms that we have in terms of legal laws, you should be not considered to stay in the country. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah, I think clear, transparently applied rules are critical, and likewise, it is pretty important that it's not rules in a vacuum.
So, in terms of the this cultural piece, you kind of referred to our previous Prime Minister Trudeau talked about that we're in this post-national world, and you used that word, but you said it could still have value and meaning, and so. How important is that to maintain in order for newcomers to kind of integrate into the what we call Canada?
I think post-nationalism is a reality, but it is not an objective goal, nor should it be a goal. So the way that Canada came together over the last couple of decades, going from a foundation where it was English, French, and there was settlement taking place, and Indigenous peoples who lived here prior to Europeans arriving. The way that Canada evolved was in a post-national sense in the last couple of decades, but that doesn't mean that needs to be our defining approach. It's a reality that we need to accept, but we also need to create space for important conversations that are happening now about what it means to be a Canadian 2025 onwards.
Thank you, Mr. Reddekopp. Thank you, Ms. Dovgal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My questions will be addressed to Ms. Dovgal. You wrote in a piece of about the strong national culture. Specifically, you highlighted the pearls of maintaining civic cohesion amid a multi-ethnic society. Please very briefly initially define what you mean by national civic cohesion. And then, in your opinion, how have recent immigration levels in the last 5 to 10 years affected overall national civic cohesion in Canada?
Thank you so much. I'm a historian by training. I became a public policy analyst and commentator after spending 5 years studying, the religions and cultures of East Asia in a pre-modern context. So I spent a lot of time, studying what it takes for a civilization to form and the conditions under which civilization can retain its relevance and strength in a world that changes. And the nature of the changes we are seeing today in the 21st century are truly remarkable. It's a very different world. Things move very quickly, and civic cohesion and identity in today's context has to be about how we maintain a high degree of trust with each other, because systems alone are not enough to do that. People need to be able to trust that the person that they share, a wall with, if they live in a condo or a townhouse, is someone that they can trust to look out for them. It's about trusting that informal systems, like in employment, are going to be fair. They're not going to be baked with the results. So things like that, I think, are crucial and part of the answer. And I think the lack of looking at that as a priority and how we structure our immigration system explains much of the tensions we have seen around immigration as an issue. And it also explains why often when immigrants come to this country, they don't understand why the rules exist, particularly when no one's enforcing them, which is a common refrain you hear from immigrants. You're telling me I could just lie on my taxes? And that's a thing I've heard. Not that I'm endorsing that view, but it's a thing that a lot of people say because they don't understand why we can somehow simultaneously have, quote unquote high trust, but also low enforcement. And we're seeing that high trust disintegrate in lifetime right now.
Thank you. So, writing on that, you talked about the culture and integration in Canada. So, what culture demands would you make on newcomers to Canada to restore the value of Canadian citizenship?
Obey the law, first of all. Respect pluralism and respect that people come from different places. And if you bear hatred towards someone of a different creed or ethnicity or linguistic identity that accords with tensions and sectarian divides that come from the place you originate from, you shouldn't bring those things with you to Canada. I think that's a reasonable expectation, and one that unfortunately we have not placed on newcomers nearly to the extent that we could.
Thank you. So building on that, what weight would you give to residency requirements in terms of language proficiency tests and citizenship tests?
I think I would structure it just based on my own experiences, based on the class of immigration. We see different socioeconomic outcomes for immigrants. I worked at Statistics Canada for a couple of years, years back, in the census of population, particularly the immigration data unit. And I worked on some files where we looked at it's called the Immigration Longitudinal Database. So when immigrants come, their class immigration has a great impact on their overall socioeconomic outcomes in this country, whether they're hospitalized, whether they die early, whether they or their children attain education. And that fact stays with me and I think should stay within this conversation, because if you're imposing linguistic fluency requirements on newcomers, you need to do so with an eye to whether they have the means to afford the types of education that they need to be proficient in a language. So if they're an economic immigrant, perhaps they pay for themselves. If they're coming under family reunification or refugee,
1 minute.
Perhaps the state should support.
So how would you feel if we give away Canadian citizenship without meeting these requirements that you just mentioned?
I think giving away citizenship without considering things like integration, linguistic fit, a cultural fit, is a unique thing in the context of a world that has lots of people migrating at all times. Many other countries, like Canada, are highly desirable places to live. No other countries, unlike Canada, are quite as lax about the standards to which we hold newcomers and immigrants.